Puer natus est nobis, et filius natus est nobis, cuius imperium superum erum eius, invocabitur nomen eius, magni concilii angelus. Cantate Domino canticum novum, quia mirabilia fecit. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Puer natus est nobis, et filius natus est nobis, cuius imperium superum erum eius, invocabitur nomen eius, magni concilii angelus.
My dear friends, the liturgy of these hours, starting already first Vespers, take us into the heart of the centuries. Ancient antiphons are heard again with all the power of meditation with which they are loaded. And in the intimacy of moments of encounter, one senses the power. We are blessed to have this morning at the day Mass, the third one therefore, a situation in which we are all, I hope, in a state of grace and therefore peace with the one that we are celebrating. Often on this day we know from experience that it can be very chaotic, you know why. But this morning at 7 o'clock there was a lovely tiny group of us, there were 4 of us in the Hermitage Chapel, and there in the deep silence still of the dark one senses that moment of eternity breaking into time as the dawn breaks, the light, especially as we're just in front nearly of New Grange, where the light was the centre of attention as they went into the dark of death, and where they capture the light at this time of day coming down the shaft in a very strange way. Now, as I was at the altar this morning, I was hit between the eyes by a memory which came to me as I was reading the Gospel of the Dawn Mass, because it spoke of what? The manger. Mangeoire. Manger is to eat. This is where the animals ate. And they produced heat with their breath to warm the little child Jesus. Now, I was there just a few weeks ago at the manger. Do you know that for historic reasons, only 2 rites are allowed use of the Holy Grotto? The Greek Orthodox and the Latin Rite ourselves. Perhaps once or twice in the year the Armenians also are allowed. Perhaps the Syrians too once, but essentially, regularly, only the Greeks and the Latins. And it's always been like that to keep the status quo. And the rubrics are still thus, after the Mass of the Greeks. And therefore it's very elastic, because that can mean a quarter of an hour either way. But the place, tiny though it is full already of clouds of incense before we get there. Now, I was down there, and it had not been programmed. I discovered that we had arrived on the one day in the week where the full solemn Latin Mass is celebrated at the manger. Thursday morning, early. But until the Second Vatican Council, it was only 3 who had access to the small altar: priest, deacon and subdeacon. Now, with concelebration, its principal celebrant, who would be the guardian, the Franciscan, and 2 privileged priests. When they discovered that I was coming along into the sacristy, wow, I thought, this is Christian charity. A good priest, probably actually one of the community, gave his place. Come. And there, 3 of us concelebrated where this had happened. Now, I'll explain. The grotto is a small expanse, and they've made it into what can resemble a chapel as much as possibly they can in that small space, but it's orientated essentially, it has to be, towards the altar of what? Where this landing, as it were, on earth took place. The star is there, the spot where the body of the Lord first touched the earth, the birthplace. And the Greeks have that altar. But they don't use chairs, they stand and kneel. And they do that for about 3 hours. Then, what happens? The Latins come in, and they put tiny little chairs in that space. But they can't use that altar. They keep the status quo, and the only altar that they are allowed is their own. It's the one of the manger. So you have the main body there, and then you have this alcove there. So the 3 priests are there, huddling around the manger. Well, the manger is actually just behind you. And the people are in the main body, listening and taking it all in, except the liturgy of the word, which they can see, of course. But boy, they're in tune. And it's actually so small that it's very powerful, the intimacy of the physicity of the presence. And do you know, when it comes to consecrating the body and blood of the Lord, of course in Latin, the one universal language of the church there it has to be, one knows this is outside time. The same words which have always been heard in this spot since that happened. And do you know also that we have this word written actually in Nazareth, at the spot where this all began? Et hic verbum caro factum est. Here! Because Nazareth is a long way from Bethlehem, and we don't realize until we go there all the effort that involved to go right down from Nazareth, way down to that part of the world, and up again, because it's up on a high mountain, Jerusalem. What am I saying? That is what we have right now. The Incarnation, brethren, is happening before our eyes, and sometimes saints have an inkling of it. They see the veil lifted sometimes, things happening, angels and so on. Now, I just want to remind you of all this. Do you know that the Lord wanted prayer in that spot? And not once, but several times, He has put on the heart of people to set apart spots very near that grotto where continuous prayer is happening. Already St. Jerome was there translating his Bible, right next to it. But all along there have been gravitation of souls towards that spot. There's a fairly recent community of adoration going on there, adoration all the time at the Mill Grotto nearly next to it. Quite young actually. But also, it happened some years ago. This holy nun, a Lebanese nun, now Blessed Mary of Jesus Crucified, Marie de Jésus Crucifié, a perpetual miracle. Do you know that when she was an adolescent, because she'd been brought up by an uncle who was actually not a Christian, but a Muslim, when she was being forced into a marriage situation and discovered what it involved, she would not have it because she wanted to give herself to the Lord. And the uncle took out a scimitar, a kind of saber affair, and yes, chopped off, to all intents and purposes, at least badly severed her neck and head. What happened? She woke up in the grotto, not of Bethlehem, but of the agony, not that far away, near Jerusalem, the agony in the garden, the grotto there. And do you know, she opened her eyes, and there was a beautiful, beautiful lady looking at her and giving her some wonderful pottage, some kind of soup. And she drank and said, "Can I have some more?" But the lady explained she was not to ask, but that she would take care. And eventually she was told what she was to do. Her head miraculously got back together, and she was able to use all her functions through this healing, but always bore the trace of what had happened. She was told where she was to go. She eventually entered a monastery in the south of France, Marseille. But by one vote or so was not received to solemn vows. Why? She had so many gifts. But eventually she was told that she would have to do various things, including go to the Lord's own land. She was Lebanese, remember, she had been Maronite, and she was to found. She founded 1 or 2 or 3 Carmels, but the most important was, yes, Bethlehem. And do you know who the architect was? A certain Jesus Christ. He drew up the plans, and the monastery is built just as he wanted it. And do you know too that he was interested in what went on there? E.g., he did not want the nuns talking in the corridors, because silence is this language, and he can't get through when there's useless noise. Remember that. Eventually, she was told where Emmaus was, and they were to found there as well. But in the meantime, do you know that she was interested in community? She, even in recreation, would go into ecstasy, what she would call le sommeil, the sleep. She tried to hide it. And do you know that sometimes she would take off? Up she would go, and she would end up in the tree. And do you know that the authenticity was such that when the Mother Superior said, "Come down," she would immediately know it and obey. Only once did she have such delight in the ecstasy that she had 1 fraction of a second of self-will and didn't want to obey straight away. And you know what happened? The ecstasy straight away was withdrawn, and she had to come down very painfully, clambering step by step. And she said, "L'agneau partit," the lamb disappeared. "Je dois descendre par mes propres moyens." I must descend by my own means. She never disobeyed again. At the age of 32, complete with her stigmata, she went into the beyond. Never could she read or write. She wasn't even a choir nun, but she showed the way to simplicity, which brings me to where I want to land. Simplicity. Joy is not complicated, nor expensive. It's made of simple, simple things. And one I would leave with you, it's this. It's made of presence. Presence with Him, I mean presence, and presence with each other, in which the sacrament of love is extended physically and emotionally to those around you. And if that is not there, my friends, it's all empty noise and tinsel. And there's much of that around today. Proof. How much drinking will go on? Is there joy in there? No, my friends. Enjoy each other and enjoy the Lord. For there's a grace in the air, a grace made of contact with